We are live. So, do you want to start with that first question again?
Um, yeah, Craig, can you hand me that box of Kleenex there?
Absolutely. There you
That's the trouble with this bed. It moves you
are.
a, a
It
long
does
way
tend to move
forward.
you forward.
Yeah, yeah. I might have to clear my throat fairly often.
Of course,
I don't know if that's a problem or not,
it is not.
but just about there. Okay, so what is your full name? Well, I hate to use my full name. I haven't through my life.
Hmm.
Ron Leyes, that was it. But for the record book, Ronald Peter Leyes. And moving into the second question about why the parents selected this name, I honestly have no idea, really.
It never came up. You never
Uh,
asked.
no, no. And it was simply not a question of it being a relative, an agent.
You weren't named after anybody in particular. Okay.
No, as far as I know, I was not.
In
Um,
school, did you have a lot of other Rons in class? And
Not a lot.
yeah,
Um, and, really, my mom later in life, because I was born on June the 13th, um, was apparently is the uh, date for the patron saint, Saint Anthony. So she always said to me, maybe I should have called you Tony.
you came perilously close to being Tony.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
but they probably realized pretty quick that none of us were Italian with a
Yeah,
name like Lias.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
That's
but
true.
anyway, yeah. So no, it was just my name when I got there. And in terms of having a nickname, um, I had lots of them. Depending on, and maybe nicknames come from your state in life or what you do for a living. Where do nicknames really come from? And that's the other thing I'm going to have to do too is squirt some of this.
Is that just helping with the moisture in your mouth?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So
Yeah, no worries.
very yeah.
And just so that we're
Mm-hmm.
clear, if you ever
Mm-hmm.
want to pause,
Mm-hmm.
I just hit a button and it pauses. It doesn't even need to stop it. So you just let me know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
so nicknames. You said you had a bunch. So would you have had nicknames as in school and then sports
Um,
and work?
Not so much in elementary school. I don't, not even really in high school. Um, I didn't have nicknames, but um, as an example, and sometimes it's the people that you are just hanging out with.
Sure.
They they give you a nickname. Like a fastball team that I was playing with, um, a 3M fastball team. Um, a guy that played on that team gave me the name Scooter, just because I don't know. I guess because I hustled or whatever. Um, Later on, when I was working at 3M, I'm sure um, it became sort of fashionable for a while to um, use, give somebody a nickname based on the initials of your name.
Right.
Where did
Okay.
that come from? I have no idea. So for a while, because it was RP, if you shorten that down, it's like RIP. So I was RIP for a while, or Ripper, or whatever.
What stage of 3M, what branch would you have been in at that point?
It
If
was
you
here
were
in
rip
London. Here in
here in
London.
London?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and again, that was just from some of the people I was associating with. I remember a guy named Wally Morrison. We hung out together for a while, and so yeah, that it just came from there. So yeah, I've had a couple. Those are two. They're being maybe the only two that I really remember. Obviously, if they came to mind.
Sure, sure.
Um, and I must say here, by the way, you did a very thorough job of putting all these questions together. Um, and what about what was I like as a child? I guess if my mom was here, she'd say something, and my brother and or sister or my dad would say something different about what I was like.
Right.
Um, but in my opinion, and some of my pictures show that actually, when I was a young kid, I think I was shy actually, um, and maybe still am. You
Are
know,
you?
yeah,
You
a
describe
little.
yourself as shy?
Yeah, well, I think as you go through life, and if you have a job that demands you become less shy, maybe that's what you do become. But yeah, like I said, I can and I think I was always concerned about being wrong or making a mistake or something. And I see some of that in you. You don't want to make a mistake, so
No.
you try hard not to. Sometimes to a point where you worry so much about it that you make the mistake. But like if I was playing ball and I uh, fumbled a ground ball, I think, oh, this is like the end of the world, right?
Right.
And so I'm not sure why you're like that, but it just happens. Um, what's my first memory? Now there's an interesting question. After 80 years, I can't remember. um, but now as I look back on them, some of those early times spent in Ridgetown, which is the town we lived in at that time. Um, yeah, I guess like all small children, the world seems a very big place when you're small. And I would say some of my first memories are wrapped around relatives because we used to get together as a family, a big family, extended, with cousins and so on,
Sure.
from time to time.
Where would you go for those
Uh,
get-togethers?
well, they would happen in and around Ridgetown. We were very close to Rondo Park, so sometimes we would go there. And uh, we were probably farthest away from that related family of any of that family. Because we lived in Ridgetown, which is probably 100 miles from Kitchener, Waterloo,
Sure.
which is where most of the family was there. Both my mom's and dad's families were raised from around there. Just from if you're thinking about Kitchener at the one end and New Hamburg or someplace like that at the other end, kind of all around it in there. That
Do
was
you
the area.
remember it not being called Kitchener, or had it already made that change from Berlin?
Yeah, I'm not that old.
No,
yeah,
no. But you
yeah.
would have been born when they made the change, would you not?
Um, no, no.
Was the change after the
The
First
change
World War?
the change was made in 1914.
Okay, so after,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, it was even before the war then. Interesting.
Berlin, Berlin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's going to be, I hope, a family keepsake. We have an Arthur Peguenot clock in the one room. You might even hear it bong an hour, depending on how sensitive your sound is here.
Right.
And it was it was made by the Arthur Peguenot Clock Company in Berlin. So it was made prior to,
Berlin, Ontario.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, Did you, is that a hand-me-down? Is that an heirloom? Is that a family clock?
yeah,
Who
yeah, it
had it
is.
before you?
My mom and dad had it. Obviously, since my mom was born in 1912, um, the same year the Titanic sank, I guess that is.
It is.
And so, yeah, it came from her side of the family, I think. That's the Horst side. Um, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, they also had, I'm not sure that they collected them or anything. They didn't have hardly any money, so I'm not sure they would have collected things like clocks. But my sister Jane in Calgary as an old figurine clock, which might even be older than the Arthur Peguenot. And she still has it, I know, but I don't think it works.
Right.
This one I've had kept up to date as much as you can keep them up to date. You don't want to change anything. But there's a bit of history inside the clock, about where it came from and all that sort of thing. So that's something that should stay in the family. Um, your mom will sort that out.
I have another question around, you mentioned that your mom was born in 1912.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at their gravesite, I noticed that she married a younger man. Was that very controversial at the time, or nobody paid any attention to that?
I don't think anybody paid any attention to that. The Yeah,
Because
she
your
was.
dad was born in 1914.
Yep, yeah, yeah. He was born in the year that they changed the name, and of course,
Where
the
was he born?
um, in Kitchener, as far as I know.
And same with your mom.
No, she would have been born in New Hamburg. I They lived on a farm outside New Hamburg, so I doubt that they had very much uh, time in town. And there was a farm far enough outside New Hamburg. I think that house is still standing, as far as I know. And but um, I think they would have had a hospital in New Hamburg where she would have been born, unless she was born at home. I
Right.
don't really
That
know that.
was pretty
Yeah.
common, I'm sure, back in 1912.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Um, so I'm surprised here, actually, when I read through these questions. Initially, they didn't seem to be all that related, and yet, as I read them here, we're weaving them into some sort of a chronology
Sure, absolutely.
of what's happened. Um, and But at any rate, yeah, it was a time when obviously the name was changed because we went to war with Germany, and they didn't want to have a city named Berlin in the heart of southwestern Ontario. And so obviously, just like today, where many things get changed because we no longer like the name, or it has a bad connotation. So it just shows that the old is forever new, I guess, you know.
Yeah, there's today's society, you're seeing more and more of,
Hmm.
anti-colonialism, right? The Sir John A. Macdonald
Hmm.
schools are getting renamed. I think Carleton University dropped
Hmm.
its name.
Hmm.
A lot of institutions are trying to distance themselves,
Hmm.
and you hope it's for the right reasons, not just trying to, be the flavor of the month, the issue of the
Hmm.
month kind of thing. But yeah, it's a
Well,
world war is a lot different than a lot easier to understand than
hmm,
colonialism, I suppose.
yeah, yeah. Um, so we maybe have a few more questions here, and then we'll either have to have a break and come back to it, or maybe come back another day.
Sure.
But so who was I closest to in my family? Um, Generally, I would say, um, in terms of siblings, when I was growing up initially, I think I was closer to Jane than I was to either Tom or Dave. Um, and I'm not really sure why. Maybe because she was the youngest, the newborn in the family.
How
And
old were you when she was born?
10, about 10 years old.
So clear memory, you remember.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
other than Tom and I, who are very close in age, only 18 months between us. Um, Dave, he's 5 years younger. So we're mirroring your family a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and So then it was another 5 years before Jane was born. So so maybe I thought, and by that time at 10, and Tom was older, and so I don't know. Maybe I sort of assumed I was sort of the big brother or whatever.
Hmm.
And I think too, um, although a lot of my admiration has, I mean, I don't know, it's like trying to pick, asking a parent to pick their favorite child. You can't really do that. But in terms of parents, I think I was maybe closer in a way to mom than I was to dad. And again, I'm not sure why, other than when you're growing up in the time that I was growing up. My mom never worked outside the house. And so when my dad was at work, obviously, so probably that comes from an association sort of thing. Um, you know, you may see some of that with your kids. Maybe they gravitate to Jen in certain ways more than they do to you
Yeah.
because
Very similar environment. She's always home.
yeah, exactly. And so sometimes you're just put into those sorts uh, of scenarios just based on timing and what's happening, what's the dynamic in your house.
What did your dad do for a living? What was
Uh,
his job?
yeah, he he was never without work because he's a tool and die maker, and they still are in great demand even in the 21st century. They're in demand, and in fact, my brother Dave, who probably is the most like my dad um, in terms of his demeanor and that sort of thing. He's a tool and die maker, and he's now 76 years old, 75, 76, that 5 year difference again. And, um, and he still works a couple of days a week
Really?
because the company he's working with, and he can pick his days, which days he wants to work. And because they realize, in fact, he's the only person who does the tool and die work for this company. And they just recognize the worth of somebody who is very good at that, you know.
What would a tool and die maker produce?
Um, he sort of designs and oversees, I guess I would say, the building of machine tools to do things like which will drill holes to within a hundredth or a thousandth of an inch. So you deal in very detailed uh, metal work typically. Yeah, it's tool work, so it's metals,
Like making molds, and like an
making
injection
molds.
mold would be something
Yeah,
he would be.
yeah, and
Yeah.
stamp for stamping machines and big equipment, things like
So
that.
almost every industry would, to a certain extent, from a manufacturing standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's automotive or
Mm-hmm.
even a shampoo bottle, I suppose, needs a
Mm-hmm.
die or a mold made for it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and I think he was certainly um, a man who was very patient. My dad was very, very patient. And I
Is that
think,
where you get it from?
well, I don't know, I guess maybe. Yeah, probably. Um, but you need patience in that particular job because you've got to be careful how you measure things and how you draw them up. And every last little bit of detail has to be there for it to come out as a success. And I think that um, yeah, if you were going to look for probably the most overriding um, characteristic of his character would it be that yeah he was patient, you know, patient with us kids. He was patient with everything that happened and went on, and he could always sit and think things out and so on. So that was, I would say, that was the overriding facet of his character, you know. And you know, what values and beliefs did my parents teach me? Well, this might be the last question for the time being, if
Okay,
that's okay.
it is.
Um, I'm not sure they spent much time teaching, as in the way you think about teaching, um, in terms of here's how you do this. I would say they're in later life. I see it. I didn't see it then, but now I think they're um, very evident way of teaching was by example. Um, so by the life they led, I mean, we could tell. We didn't have. We were fine. We were fine economically, and we got along. We always had lots of food to eat and all that sort of thing. So my mom was a very good cook and all that sort of thing, and stayed home all the time. And I think they taught us by that the value of um, doing good work, and whatever you were doing, you did well, and you could do a lot of things manually. Um, One of the early things I remember doing, because I liked to do it, was we used to have a little bit of a vegetable garden pretty much wherever we lived, and so could dig that and turn over the dirt, and you could, like simple things like that. And but yeah, my dad was a person who um, talked to us too a bit about his work, and we had an interesting time. And that must have been an interesting time for my mom and my dad. The last year we lived in Ridgetown, um, my dad was working in London, and
That's quite the commute.
well, yeah, he didn't commute in those days. He had he roomed at a boarding house in London
Okay.
from Monday to Friday, and then came home on the weekends. So that would have been difficult for my mom because she had us, you know, through that whole time and on her own. And so that would have been when I was, I guess, 6 years old. Yeah, something like that. So 6, 7 years old when we were in a transition, because my dad, when they were first married, they lived in Woodstock actually, because that's where my dad was working. And then he took the job in Ridgetown, working for uh, a company called A.J. Bates. I don't know why I remember that name, but they were a tool and die uh, company, if you will.
Gotcha.
They made these dies and so on. So, but they weren't paying. I guess they weren't paying very good money or whatever. So my dad found this job working in London um, for a company called Power Lawnmowers. There's a really and actually it's interesting here. You go over this bridge along Highbury Ave over the railroad tracks uh, a lot, I'm sure.
Twice a day, every day.
Well, the next time you're going south on Highbury, um, if you took a look over, I think that maybe even the building might still be there. Took a look over on your right hand side, down below the bridge,
So on the west hand side. Yep.
yeah, on the west. Um, there might be a building there, which was an old fabricated metal thing with with the roof like that, hinge roof. That's where they were located. And so he got a job there working for this Power Lawnmowers. And and so for that 1 year, yeah, he did his commute and that sort of thing. And after a year, we moved to London, um, to the house on Curry Street, which they lived in then for, well, my mom for 3 years longer than dad because he had died. But they were in there between 35 and 40 years in that
Wow.
house. And it was like they picked it for very practical reasons. And again, um, that was the way that they thought, that was walking distance to school for us kids. And it was, it was a new house at the time, which was foreign to us because the two old places we lived in Ridgetown were pretty old. And so that was 1950. And again, what they taught us was the patience. And for the first time, because we were brought up Catholic, and again, that's how they were teaching by example, right? Um, and they taught, I mean, whatever we could pick up at 6, 7, 8 years old, that maybe that was an important thing in life. You should pay attention to that. And so I think when we're talking about teaching, as I said, it was more by example than it was by do it this way and do it this way and so on. And so I'm probably rambling as I go back and forth here, but we'll edit this at some point in time, I guess. And
Yeah, no, that's an interesting. I mean, obviously, I've heard of Curry Street before.
mhm.
That's interesting to hear. What age would you have been? You would have been 12,
Oh no, when I was in grade 2, I'm pretty sure, because I would have been 8 years old then.
right? Okay.
Um, and
So you
so,
remember going to a new school in grade 2? Oh
yeah,
yeah, we have that in common. That's what
yeah,
grade I was in St. Pat's, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's neat.
yeah, a new school. And it was interesting too, because in Ridgetown, we did live almost right next to the school. So we were close to living close to the
Did
school.
you ever have to take a school bus then?
No,
Ah,
no, never.
that's funny.
And I can remember, I can still remember going home and telling mom probably, or mom and dad together, I'm not sure, that it was such a strange school that we were going to in a way, never related it necessarily to religion, but it was a public school in Ridgetown because it was too small to have a separate school. I can remember going home after the first day and saying, at this school, we really pray a lot. And because having gone to a public school, I mean, I don't know what it's like today, but then we started the day with a prayer. The classrooms did their prayer. There were no such things as PA systems in the classroom.
Right.
And I think we might have said a prayer at recess and another one when we went home for lunch and so on. So I can remember telling them that, and that was pretty strange to us.
Yeah, I know in school today they start with the Canadian anthem and a prayer.
Hmm.
But I'll have to check with Scotty and see if they pray. If I would assume they probably have a prayer at lunch,
Hmm.
um, but that might be it. That might be all. Might just be those two.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll have to check with him. Shall we take a break?
Well, yeah, I'll just finish off though
Yep.
by saying I was, inside when you guys made your move over to Briar Hill. And at first we thought that, the boys would go to elementary school at St. Mark's, which is where our daughter Serena teaches. And then learned that, oh no, that's wrong. They were going to go to Blessed Sacrament School. And I thought, wow, here we go. This is like 70 years from 1950 to 2020, 2021. 70 years later, that our two of our grandsons, and a third, I think, will also end up going there, um, are at that same school, and the one where they prayed a lot. And
That's neat. Yeah,
yeah, and somehow it sort of is a nice full circle,
that's a legacy, right?
yeah, full circle family, and so maybe that's a good place to take a break.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
Nice.